This podcast serves Middle Tennessee every weekday morning, and it's made possible by member support. Learn how you can make a difference at WPLN.org/support.
This is the Nash Villager Podcast. It's November 14th, 2025. On this day in 1935, a group of Nashville ministers gathered to protest a New Deal project that federal officials said would help the very people who filled the pews in those ministers' churches. The problem wasn't that the government wanted to help. It was what other good things would be destroyed in the process. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. When we talk about the ways the government has been a destructive force in the historically black neighborhood of North Nashville, the prime example that's often given is the way that Interstate 40 cuts right across what was once the main corridor of businesses, churches, and educational institutions. It literally cut the neighborhood in two. But that wasn't the first time federal money was used to tear down what Black Nashville had built in the name of progress. North Nashville became a center for Black development after the Civil War. By the turn of the 20th century, Jefferson Street had become this amazing incubator for building community, but also for fostering entrepreneurship and innovation. Fisk, Meharry, what we now call TSU, all sprung up along the street. Citizens Bank was established there. At one point, there was a Black-owned streetcar line servicing the neighborhood so that people wouldn't have to ride the segregated one that the electric utility ran. A lot of the people in the neighborhood were poor, but middle-class housing sprung up on the side streets, too. It was vibrant. It was thriving. Then, of course, it was hit by the Great Depression, just like every other community was. As President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration developed its New Deal programs to put people to work and make tangible improvements, one of the things the Public Works Administration decided to do was to build new housing projects for people desperate for a safe and affordable place to live. And Nashville definitely needed that. At this point, the city still had neighborhoods that were literal shanty towns, where folks essentially lived in shacks. The plan announced for Nashville in 1935 was a pair of housing developments. One, called Cheatham Place, would give the poorest white people a place to live. The other, to be named Andrew Jackson Courts, would be for Black folks. The problem was that Andrew Jackson Courts wasn't going to be built on empty land. And it wasn't going to be a reworking of one of the desperately awful places where impoverished Black people already lived. Instead, the government wanted to tear down churches and middle-class housing in North Nashville in order to make way for the housing project. Ministers in the African Methodist Episcopal, or AME Church, organized in opposition to that plan. And on this day, they voiced the concern that echoed all over North Nashville. If something has to be torn down, why should it be that? Surely there was some other place to put that housing. But, as you may guess, their protests were ignored. In 1937, Congress passed the Housing Act that allocated funding for those kinds of projects. And by 1938, announcements were circulated inviting North Nashvillians to tour, quote, Nashville's new modern housing project for Negroes. White people also invited. Andrew Jackson Courts is still there. It's a cluster of nearly 400 brick row houses between Marathon Village and the Fisk campus. So is the housing project that was built at the same time for white folks. Cheatham Place is the one you can see on Rosa Parks when you drive north out of downtown, right before you get to the interstate loop. Both are still subsidized housing, operated now by Metro. Obviously, they're not segregated anymore. Unlike several other projects that came about later, those two still use the original buildings constructed before World War II. Buildings that took the place of a more economically diverse community that North Nashville residents had worked very hard to build for themselves. In just a few minutes, an old-fashioned tent revival. That's coming up after the newscast.
Nashville Public Radio is always here to keep you informed, whether it's the latest news or music you should check out. Every week, What Where Wednesdays shares the latest happenings taking place right here in Nashville by talking to members of our community, putting on events in your neighborhood and beyond. So tune in to What Were Wednesdays every Wednesday, and you can always find events at WNXP.org/events.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. The end of the government shutdown is welcome news for Tennesseans who depend on federal food aid. 700,000 who were missing out on their supplemental nutrition assistance benefits should now be on the way back to normal. That's a relief for mothers like Alexis Lawless. She said although food drives and other pop-ups helped over the past few weeks, they came with their own challenges.
My family takes MTA all around the city, carrying those food boxes, trying to distribute those heavy cans into little bags on the buses. So navigating all the information can kind of be overwhelming. Having it, align with the schedule of my kids getting out and making sure that I can get there either with my kids or before they get out and get to my kids on time, it can be a challenge.
President Trump said full SNAP benefits would be distributed shortly after the government opens. But Tennessee's state website is still announcing only partial payments. Before President Donald Trump took office this year, 2 Tennessee law enforcement agencies had formal agreements to collaborate with ICE under its 287G program. Now that number is 48. The dramatic increase in participation coincides with the Trump administration's crackdown on immigration and new financial incentives for law enforcement agencies that signed up by October 1st. The Tennessee Lookout reports ICE will reimburse the salaries, benefits, and overtime for each officer trained under the program. 287G partner agencies can also receive $100,000 for vehicles and $7,500 per officer for cell phones and laptops. There are 3 distinct ways to participate in the program. Most Tennessee agencies have opted for the jail enforcement or warrant service officer models, which allow local police to identify or serve warrants to individuals who are already in custody. A dozen Tennessee law enforcement agencies, including the Tennessee Highway Patrol, are part of the more intensive task force model, which allows officers to enforce immigration laws while doing their routine duties. That's the kind of cooperation that can turn a traffic stop into an immigration arrest, like the raids that took place in Nashville in May. The race for Tennessee's open congressional seat may be more competitive than first predicted. The Cook Political Report, a nonpartisan newsletter, first listed the 7th Congressional District as solidly Republican, but has now shifted to likely Republican. That change comes after Democrats won several special races in other states last week. Democratic National Convention Chair Ken Martin tells WPLN's Miriam those victories send a message that voters are rejecting the president's policies.
But the other message they sent was that they supported candidates who were focused on a positive vision, a vision on how to build an economy that works for everyone and particularly brings down the cost of goods, make sure that people have access to health care, and make sure that people's freedoms are protected. And that's what that election was about as well.
Although there has been a shift, the 7th District, which includes parts of Nashville, has still been a majority red district. Early voting kicked off this week in the special election and runs through Wednesday, November 26th. Democratic State Representative Afton Bain is facing off against Republican and Tennessee bureaucrat Matt Van Epps on Election Day, December 2nd. Tennessee State Representative Caleb Hemmer won't run for re-election next year. Hemmer, the 44-year-old Democrat, narrowly won the seat representing part of Davidson County around Brentwood in 2022. He told the Nashville Post he now wants to focus more time on his wife, 2 young kids, and work responsibilities. At least 2 candidates are already expected to run for the open seat. They include Republican businessman Bill Hancock and retired Tennessee Highway Patrol Lieutenant Colonel Mark Proctor, who is a Democrat. A teacher with Williamson County Schools has been reinstated after her suspension in September over a social media post related to the death of Charlie Kirk. But it's unclear what that means for a federal lawsuit she filed last month against the school district, or if she'll return to the classroom. Chalkbeat reports Franklin High School science teacher Emily Orbison was reinstated earlier this week with 2 months of back pay. The district included her reinstatement letter as evidence in a motion to dismiss her lawsuit. Orbison has argued her Instagram story, which quoted Kirk's defense of Second Amendment rights, was private and posted on her own time. But it wound up getting attention in the media and from Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn, who commented, quote, "Fire her immediately." The U.S. saw 14 disasters that caused at least $1 billion of damage in the first half of this year. 8 of those disasters hit Tennessee between February and June. WPLN's Caroline Eggers reports that all 8 were severe storms.
Severe storms are thunderstorms that produce tornadoes, fast winds, or large hail. One notable event was a lengthy downpour in April. In just 2 weeks, the Nashville area got 160 tornado, thunderstorm, and flash flood warnings. And Clarksville set a record for a 5-day rainfall. In May, another storm dropped tennis ball-sized hail. Details of every disaster are kept by a nonprofit called Climate Central. The federal government used to provide this information, but in May, the Trump administration ordered the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to stop updating the database. The data is one way of understanding how storm risks are evolving between things like outdated housing codes and climate breakdown. Earth hit record high levels of carbon dioxide last year, and each year that emissions grow, we lock in more long-term heating. And with more heating, extreme weather fills out the calendar. Caroline Eggers, WPLN News.
Nashville's new Journey Pass program, which provides free bus fares to low-income residents, is ramping up enrollment. The program officially launched this month. It's signed up 4,500 residents so far. Enrollees qualify by receiving social services like SNAP or housing vouchers and get a free unlimited bus pass good for 3 years. Journey Pass is one result of last year's transit referendum. That vote established a half-cent sales tax to fund a range of massive transit upgrades. The free fare program's impact was visible almost immediately. The city held sign-up events last week for SNAP recipients whose benefits have been delayed amid the government shutdown. Hundreds showed up to an event at the Metro Action Commission, to the point that WeGo turned some folks away and encouraged them to attend later events. WeGo has now added additional sign-up sessions, including this morning at Metro Social Services from 9 to noon, Monday at Metro Action Commission from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., and Tuesday at East Park Community Center from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. There are more sign-up events, and the full list can be found at wegotransit.com/journeypass. A candlelight vigil honoring 900 Tennesseans who've died so far this year in traffic crashes will take place this weekend in Murfreesboro. More than 200 of those fatalities occurred in Middle Tennessee. In addition to honoring the lives lost, the vigil is pushing for policies to incentivize safe driving. That includes targeting so-called super speeders who repeatedly drive at dangerously high speeds by using technology to regulate their driving. Speeding is a factor in nearly a third of all fatal crashes. The vigil will be put on by Families for Safe Streets, a group for people who've lost loved ones or been affected in some way by traffic crashes. It's set for 2 p.m. on Sunday outside Murfreesboro's City Hall. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. For decades, tent revivals were a staple of Christian worship throughout the South. But with the onset of TV and later the internet, many congregations opted for cheaper, far-reaching mediums for sharing the gospel. They aren't gone for good, though. WEOT's Pierce Gentry takes us to a traditional tent revival in rural East Tennessee.
On a plot of farmland adjacent to an elementary school in Oneida, hundreds of churchgoers flock to a white tent standing tall on a hill. In the evening moonglow, the only source of light off this countryside road emanates from the tent. The only sounds are the chittering of the cicadas and the music. Lots of music. This is a tent revival being put on by several churches in Scott County. Fed up with the distractions of modern life, they pitched an 800-person tent to host 1 week of nightly revival services.
And right now we need God back, not only in Scott County, but in Tennessee, Knox County, surrounding counties.
That's Jordan Potter, a pastor from Oneida who's been preaching for about a year. He doesn't have his own church and says he felt called by God several months ago to organize a traditional tent revival for his community. After draping banners and posting signs all over town, hundreds showed up to fill the tent, and then some.
I honestly feel like there's going to be a movement here in Scott County that we've never seen before, and it's going to carry on someplace else.
Revivals have been a staple of Appalachian culture for decades. When many people think of Southern evangelism, they think of the white tents, the screaming, the shouting, what Jordan calls a spiritual high.
When you come off of a very good revival, there is a high that you can never get, but through God. I don't care what you pick up in this world, you cannot get that same high.
It's a way for followers of Jesus Christ to reconnect with the Spirit, one of the 3 tenets of the Holy Trinity. While this tradition today feels uniquely American, its origins date back to medieval Europe. Here's Joe Witt, an associate professor of religious studies at the University of Tennessee.
And so that's part of the reason why it becomes such a prominent, method here in this region, is because a lot of people knew about it back over in Europe.
In those days, revivals were a practice of convenience. Large customs like the Eucharist or communion would be taken together by several smaller churches. To accommodate the crowds, tents would be erected. It wasn't until the early to mid 20th century that tent revivals began to take on a religious significance of their own.
And so now, this kind of preaching, this very emotional service is a necessary part. Instead of just kind of a fun event, now it's kind of a necessary dimension of worship.
The spectacle of the services and the intensity of the messages delivered by the pastors involved are designed to evoke emotion from people who otherwise may not accept Christ. For decades, this was the leading method for Southern gospel preachers to spread their message. But with the advent of television in the 1950s, faith leaders quickly adapted to the new medium.
And now you can get these messages to many more people, instead of just having to tour to communities.
Potter claims the last tent revival in Scott County was held in the 1950s. For years, he says, he dreamed of putting on one of his own, of reviving his community's faith.
And lo and behold, I didn't think I was going to be the person holding one.
This revival was a hit. Hundreds filled the Oneida Hilltop, many clamoring for an opportunity to connect with other believers of different churches on a personal level.
I think there's something very human in the tent revival and just what it shows us about what religion really is for people, and whatever religion we're talking about. In this modern era when, we have technology and ChatGPT and everything seems so mediated, people are still looking for that type of spiritual connection, and tent revivals are one way to provide it.
From Scott County, I'm Pierce Gentry, WUOT News.
Thank God I'm free now. Amen.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday, so subscribe in your favorite podcasting app to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you like this, you'll probably enjoy the Nashvillager newsletter, too. You'll get perspective from more of my colleagues at Nashville Public Radio and links to the stories we're following. Sign up for those daily emails at WPLN.org/Nashvillager. And thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up next week.